A warm welcome back to the channel. Australia is getting a brand new airline. There's a new Airworthiness Directive for a Boeing 787 Dreamliner, and lastly, some changes at WestJet. Let's begin with Boeing, with the Federal Aviation Administration, or more commonly referred to as the FAA, issuing a new Airworthiness Directive in response to a March incident involving the 787 Dreamliner at Boeing. This Airworthiness Directive follows a 787-9 flight that you may recall was with LATAM, originating in Sydney, Australia. The flight, after departure, nosedived unexpectedly mid-flight, injuring some 50 of the passengers aboard. In total, the flight had 263 passengers with 9 crew, and saw those that were either standing or not strapped into their seats slam into the ceiling. The flight eventually would arrive in Auckland, and that only followed doctors examining the injured patients aboard the aircraft. In fact, when speaking with the BBC, a passenger said that the plane dropped unlike anything he'd ever experienced before, with passengers being thrown into the roof of the cabin like something you'd see out of a disaster movie. The alarming incident, which was obviously traumatic for passengers, was then investigated by all the relevant parties to get to the bottom of how something like this could occur, and obviously to try and prevent it from happening in the future. And now the FAA, the key regulator for Boeing, is responding. They stated in their AD that the unexpected and obviously intense dive was caused by the captain's seat and an uncommanded movement, which led to basically the autopilot disengaging momentarily during the flight. Interestingly, however, as part of the AD, the FAA stated that this wasn't the only time something like this occurred, with actually 5 other reports of the first officer seat on the Boeing 787 basically moving uncommanded. So it is a reoccurring problem, with obviously the LATAM incident being the worst one, just thanks to all the injuries. It doesn't though mean the others weren't dangerous. The thing is, airworthiness directives are absolutely not uncommon, as you've probably seen me talk about them here on the channel before, and they're typically imposed to ensure that the aircraft in question, or maybe if it is just related to strictly a part, can be maintained to the highest order. They're in place for the safety of all those involved in flying the aircraft or jumping aboard it. Furthermore, any prospective issues can therefore be inspected to make sure they don't have possible further negative ramifications, and moving forward, the FAA says that airline customers of the Dreamliner must now inspect the cockpit seats to prevent this type of incident from happening again. And over to Australia, and my home, Melbourne. Juneyao has announced it will begin serving direct flights to Melbourne Airport in Australia from the 19th of December 2024. The landmark announcement will see flights operate thrice weekly, with the company using its flagship Boeing 787-9 Dreamliner. However, while these services will begin as thrice weekly, they'll increase to daily in January and February to meet the seasonal demand that is present. Despite there being obvious levels of demand during this season, it means flights will move to daily, and really, this is a pretty hefty jump for a brand new carrier to the country, and it's something that is not often seen even when you consider other airlines in neighbouring markets that fly down to Australia. As a result, you could say that Juneyao Airlines has considerable confidence in the Melbourne to Shanghai market, and is also fending off other airlines that fly between the locations, as they won't be the only company serving between these two cities. A pretty interesting point to make note of. It'll be interesting to see what their load factors look like once service does commence, but like I touched on, they feel there is enough demand for daily flights. Melbourne welcoming this company is actually also a fantastic development for Australia and for the state of Victoria, with the airline selecting Melbourne as the first city in the country. Flights will originate in Shanghai, solidifying Melbourne Airport's efforts to recover in the market and nearby ones. Once flights do commence, Melbourne Airport's mainland China seat capacity will actually reach above pre-pandemic figures, with most airlines having returned from their service suspension. The 787-9 will arrive into Melbourne at 7 a.m. with a 9 a.m. departure, making a swift turnaround necessary due to the strain on current facilities. It also means I'll be able to head out and film potentially the inaugural arrival and landing. Melbourne Airport says it's investing, yes, in major major projects, such as the ongoing international baggage system and third runway, to respond to increasing demand. The latter, however, remains a question mark. The airport has long hoped for a third runway, however, other pressing legal concerns, and when you also consider things such as the rail link, an international terminal expansion, and more, are all continuing to be delayed or not simply progress due to the detriment of the current facilities, passengers, and prospective airlines and routes that need to be started up. The overall impact on passengers will be huge, as airlines have not just returned to Melbourne but also expanded, paired with the upgauging of existing routes. The airport's rapid attempts to complete infrastructure projects has caused chaos for passengers with immigration delays and more. Melbourne Airport is aware of the situation it finds itself in, but it's in a race against time to actually bring itself up to the standards required. As for Juneyao, well, it's a fantastic addition to not just my home of Melbourne, but the Australian aviation industry, and I'm certainly excited to see how they do. On to the final story. After roughly a year, WestJet has announced it will be cutting back the flying in its cargo division and place aircraft that were previously destined to fly into storage. For WestJet Cargo, the launch into this freighter market was seen as a bid to expand the business, and I do have to apologise for just showing you regular WestJet footage. I simply haven't been over to Canada to be able to get any B-roll of their cargo aircraft, and there's not much available in terms of free use, so my sincerest apologies. I hope you'll forgive me for that. Back to what I was saying, the launch was with the bid of trying to increase revenues and generally diversify the business. However, now as your 737Fs are parked, WestJet is essentially throwing in a lot of the towel and believing it doesn't stand the chance it once thought it would. The Canadian carrier primarily cites that the freight market within the country is incredibly challenging, and while that is a very basic statement, there was a lot of talk on how there is less demand than expected, and also we had executives highlight struggles to compete with other more established freight operators, and that could namely be in the eye of Air Canada Cargo. While the flag carrier's cargo division hasn't had it easy and has also been forced to park new planes due to a lack of demand revealed in a recent investor meeting, its stronghold is certainly more than present over, say, your WestJet Cargo. And really, if I dig deeper, the reasoning from WestJet is particularly interesting to me, as it replicates a lot of what is being felt on the passenger side of things. We've seen so many carriers in that country shut down in recent times. All of these share a common theme. While some may argue they were always destined to fail, you have to look at it from a standpoint of that they're competing in a market that is incredibly difficult to crack, and competition is always going to come from the established Air Canada, and these companies don't have the resources to adequately match that. 2 Boeing converted freighters will remain in service, as confirmed by a spokesperson for WestJet to Skies Mag, and this is a big development. Why? Well, because initial reports cited that the WestJet Cargo division was basically shutting down, so this is a massive contrary to that report. They say 2 units will still remain airborne. They're basically just cutting back their active fleet. We'll have to wait and see how this all progresses, but it is still a fascinating development to say the least. Thanks a lot for watching. Take care, be safe, and I'll see you tomorrow for your next industry recap. And we'll fly.